Good morning. This is Group 2, Module 3, looking into what we learned this week. To start off our discussion, we're going to dive in with sort of a general question. Why is race and racism a critical topic in today's public schools?
Okay.
Yeah, don't even. Go ahead. Go ahead, Beck.
All right. I think that just with all of this violence against youth of color, especially at the high school level, those things are very real to the students. And as the population changes from, students of color being the minority to now it being closer to like 50-50, I can't remember the exact percentages, but it's more prominent. And then again, my reaction was just all of that like anti-Blackness violence is really real to these students. And I think it's a really big factor for kids in schools these days.
Yeah, I think that the climate of our country right now seems to be, the divisiveness makes racism more of a discussion point and more of a problem. Our government seems to be wanting to divide rather than unite people, and everybody's trying to choose. It almost seems like people are trying to choose sides, or some people are trying to choose sides, I should say. And that brings it more into the forefront, so our kids notice it more. And
yeah, I think the readings and everything, one of the things that caught my attention is having a voice. And together and dialoguing and discussing this sensitive issue be one of the issues that really affect this country. So I think allowing people of color to come together and have a dialogue, and one we talked about was these children in the school have a story to tell. And so when you kind of shut that voice off, kind of shut off the conversation about racism and trying to have a solution to the problem. And so that's one of the things that I saw in the articles. Many of those people of color don't have a voice.
What I liked from this reading and what reminded me of things we're talking about at my own school is the representation of different cultures and races in the curriculum. And that goes with the whole color blindness thing and the curriculum that comes from white people and you don't even think about other people. So one of the articles said that a big part of learning is identity development and learning about yourself. And so as long as that's not there for students of color and non-white students, they're like missing a huge piece of their education and self-identity that white students are getting that other students are not.
Mm-hmm.
And for me in the elementary setting, I feel like, to go off what you're saying, Casey, our curriculum does it, and we do so much. Oh man, I forgot the level. Is it the contributions level in the elementary where, it's Black History Month, so we're going to read all the picture books about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and all that we can, but we only do it for 1 month. Or November is Native American month. Now we're going to do, so I feel like we do that so much, but in our minds we're probably thinking, we are being diverse, but we're really not.
Yes.
So that's one thing that stuck out to me, especially in the elementary level. I don't know if they do that a lot in the high school. But
yeah, I'm in the elementary level too, Ansley, and I see the same thing. We try, or at least we try to make it not just the holidays and heroes like they were talking about, but sometimes it just seems really difficult because there's so much that we need to cover in everything. It's like, well, what do I choose to include and what do I choose to not include? What's more important at this point, and how do you get it all together in a way that's going to help all of our kids?
Mm-hmm. Some of the curricula I've heard, especially social studies teachers talking about, is rather than organizing like history courses chronologically, doing them based on big themes. And the teachers I know that have done those, that they've talked about being able to do deeper dives into this. I'm trying to remember which article talked about the stories that get left out. Like Thaddius was talking earlier about how important those stories are, and we're not including that in how we're teaching or what we're teaching, except about white people, the actual storytelling part. And like missing out that Dr. King was not so beloved before he was murdered. Like, he was a radical. He was out there changing things. Some of the most powerful writing we have from him is from jail.
Yes.
And that somehow that gets glossed over. But when they're looking at things in terms of themes, it seems like, from what I've heard them talk about, that it's been easier to weave in the actual people and not just do that, like, hero, check, tokenism, yay! We covered Native Americans this year, aren't we good? Pat on back, moving on.
Well, that so reminds me of one of the most interesting things from one of the first readings this week is that somewhere in there it said that especially with that contributions approach is that whenever they're like inserted in there, it's only for a contribution that white people like. It's not other things. It's only the white people who decide what contributions deserve to be put into the curriculum.
And I think too, Casey, there was a quote, I think it was in the Banks article, but it talked about how like, it was referencing like field trips, but I think it's the whole like heroes and holidays approach too, that it basically like reinforces the stereotypes and misconceptions if the students don't have like the ability to like think about it on a deeper level. So again, it's like, yeah, how do you bridge that? Like, hey, we need to talk about it, but we need to do it in not a superficial way.
Yes.
To piggyback off what Whitney had said earlier, the pressure of trying to show our students everything they need as far as preparing them of the end of the year testing, this accountability that in the school now is very hard to try to implement all these things in there while you're trying to make sure they are prepared. But I think one of the problems in our curriculum is high-speed testing, accountability. I think that kind of stifles the ability to teach and implement these type of curriculums for our students. And so I think some of that needs to be changed as well.
Absolutely.
So as
that brings in, sorry, I was just going to say, what you're bringing in also brings in, like, those state tests and how they, they're, what's the word? They're, like, setting them to fail, too, because it's more of our language, or, you know, more of the proper English, where in their home, it's not different. It's not the formal English. And so that brings up the other case for that state test. Yes, we want to incorporate all this stuff, but yet the test itself is setting them up for failure as well.
Absolutely. And that it's not just a racial, I'm sorry, Laura, but it's not just a racial issue, it's a cultural issue, and as well as far as these tests go, because many of the tests are written based on, I'm going to use air quotes, or white middle class values. And the students I teach are, like I said, I've told you before, most of my kids are white, but we are in a very rural area. And some of the things that they reference in these tests, my kids have no idea what they're talking about. No matter how hard we try to teach to the test and give them this information so that they'll know what to expect, it's not part of their everyday lives. So they're like, okay, whatever you say.
So as we look at tests that are written like that are very white-centric, very middle-class, like if we are writing this for suburban white children, and Ansley, you talked a little bit about the language issue. One of the things in the, I think it was the Johnson, Jackson, Stovall, and Bazile, I'm guessing, article was kind of on that language thing. The language used to describe black bodies derives from disdain, disrespect, and devaluation of black people. So I want to hear your kind of what you took away from the articles about anti-blackness. How is that defined? And I guess past the discussion question, what spoke to you in that?
One of the things in the anti-blackness article, I can't remember who wrote it now.
Dumas.
I'm sorry. Yes, Dumas. They stated that black people, the way he put it was that they exist as structural antagonistic to humanity. That killed me. That broke my heart. You know, that, and saying that as whites, we go in thinking that blacks are inherently already a problem before we even meet these kids, and that they're not educable, and that killed me. Because I don't, looking deep in myself, I don't think that I believe that. But the thought that some people would think that I do, just because I'm mostly white, I look white, scares the heck out of me.
I think it was in the same article, or the anti-blackness article, that he also said that anti-blackness in education specifically is what you mentioned with looking at students of color, thinking of them with deficiencies whenever they walk into the school already.
Deficient-oriented and pathologizing ideologies.
Yeah. So, just agreeing with what you said,
And there's a quote somewhere, I know, Laura, we were working on it yesterday in the case study, about how when, like, students struggle, right, we assume that they're deficient, not, like, our practices are deficient. Like, we're kind of, like, again, especially with students of color, right, we're like, oh, well, we did everything we could. They're, you know.
It's their problem now.
Yeah, it's kind of like a defense mechanism for us, or for teachers to kind of be like, well, you know, I tried, but really, the article on anti-blackness, Whitney, kind of like you, it really, I mean, just kind of how harsh it was written, and like the language used really made me pause and like think deeply about like, okay, how do I present myself in society, in the classroom? Because the last thing I would want is for anyone to think that this is how I view students of color. But as we've learned, there's so much that's just embedded in our society that, but no, I'm with you, Whitney, that it was very eye-opening.
And Thaddius, I think I heard you saying something.
I don't know if it had anything to do with this particular article, but I remember reading something about the some of the structures that are in place. Like, for example, you have your IQ testing.
Yes.
Really is not a valid tool for testing for people of color. That determines whether they're intelligent enough or not. You have other structures, for example, that has been passed down from generation to generation, like this scientific theories. So those things are still, the literature is out there, it's still in place, it's still being exposed to those of color and those who are white as well. And so those things are kind of still existing, and it has not been dealt with over the years. So I think it's like a cycle, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's kind of systematic, keeps going on and on. It's really never been dealt with. No, we're having a conversation about it, but it hasn't really been dealt with.
Before we swap out our video feeds here, how does this change when we look at multiracial students? So if we, so far we've been talking about mostly black students and white students. When we look at multiracial students, what is different?
One of the things that struck me in the article about multiracial students is that sometimes they're forced to choose which race they are and which culture they want to back, if you will. Like I said, I am white and Hispanic, and I've never felt like I had to choose between my Mexican side and my white side, but some of these kids, especially, it seems to me it would be more of an issue with multiracial children who look more multiracial. It's like, okay, you have to choose whether you're black like your daddy or white like your mama. And that to me seems like it would be such a hard thing for a child to ask them to pick a culture and say, you're just going to be this one and not that one. And that really stuck out to me in this article that we read.
Something that just stuck out to me that I specifically remember was that I thought it was interesting how different, I think, how you can't just judge a multiracial person because you don't know what their home life is like, because it said that normally people will assume that they are going to identify with the minority part of them, which obviously isn't true for everybody, but it also said that some households, if they're split households, that they may celebrate both equally, but then others, if it's like a single family household, they may not even talk about that other part of the person. So I just thought that was interesting.
And just one little thing, for me also, I thought of my baby, and then I thought of my friend too. She's half Filipino, half American, and she's 45 now, but she was saying it was really hard for her growing up because when you look at that box, when it says what's your race, and she never knew what to put because it wasn't at that time for her to put that she was Filipino, and she felt like it by making someone decide, she felt like she was an outcast and all by herself. She didn't belong anywhere because it was making her split, and she felt torn the whole time, and she didn't want to choose. And she said even now she's 45 and it still affects her on what does she look like, because she has white skin, but she has some features of a Filipino, and it's still to her because of how she grew up. She feels torn because her mom didn't want her to. Her mom pushed her to say she's white, but she wanted to embrace the other side too. So it really affected her whole life as well.
One of the other things we read about this week was the model minority stereotype. What did that mean, or what meaning did you take out of the articles for that? I mean, it seems like a lot of social standing issues were, in the Lee article, being a model minority would gain favor with white middle-class students. Yeah. Now, specifically referring to Korean students. The school I grew up in was fairly diverse, but a lot of Korean kids and Indian kids, and some other Southeast Asian students, but those striations were very clear, and so that was interesting reading in that article. Oh, this is a natural pattern, not just in our school. This is kind of how this is done socially, and so that was kind of interesting to see. And I could see that pattern in the kind of gaining social acceptance by trying to meet those sort of suburban middle class benchmarks, almost like it was sort of a checklist. So that was familiar.
And there was a quote in I think it was the Lee article when they talked about the model minority student, and it was a student reflecting, basically saying that if you're not doing well in math or science, the quote was the teacher's what are you, some kind of mutant Asian? And that really stuck out to me, just the fact that a student would say the phrase mutant Asian. That was really powerful of wow, if they get that, I don't want to say vibe, but if that's what they feel walking into a classroom from the teacher, that's really sad. But that idea that just because they're Asian doesn't mean they're smart. Again, we don't classify, white people in a certain way, but we tend to do that with minorities, especially Asians. Yeah. It's just that assumption that, oh, you're good at school, and if you're not, something's wrong with you, is really eye-opening.
Yes, I found that as well, both just thinking, okay, all of the Asian kids are smart. You don't think that all of the white kids are smart. Why would you think that all of the Asian kids are going to be math aces and all of the, it was hard. It was hard to think about, is that how I am? And I don't think so, but that reflection has been pretty heavy this week.
Yeah, I thought...
Speaking of heavy emotions on here, I want to make sure we have time to talk about that Dalton video.
Yes,
even before we started, that was kind of a heavy thing for people. So who would like to dive in on that one?
Oh, I can.
Good.
So as I mentioned, I am having a baby, and his father is Egyptian. And then, of course, so I was just watching the video at first. I was heartbroken. It was the saddest thing for me. And then I thought about my son, especially when, they kept picking, you had the two dolls, but the one where it was the I think it was 5 or 6 dolls, and it ranged from different colors.
Yes.
And some of them said, well, the dark, and it was like they were picking out anyone as long as they were brown or if they were black. If they were darker skinned, they were ugly, they were dumb. And who knows, my son might be darker skinned. And so it really like hit me, and it was so sad. And like, just like, and then the little girl, here's a couple of them. The little black girl who said, she chose the white doll because she said the brown doll was ugly because the skin was nasty like hers. And I just started bawling because a little girl, she's probably first grade or younger, thinking that she's nasty just because she has darker skin.
Yes.
I broke down. It was awful for me.
I thought that they asked really 2 important questions in that because people could argue that like everything that they're choosing is subconscious, but then the 2 questions that were so important was first, what doll do you think adults like more, or which one do you think adults don't like? And then the other question that was so important is which doll looks like you, because that points out that it's not just random choices that they're making. So I thought that those questions that they purposely put in there were really important.
Yes, and I noticed when they asked the children which doll looked most like you, a couple of the darker skinned children hesitated before they chose the black doll.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is the one that looks like me, but I don't know if I want to say that because I just said that this was nasty and ugly, and is that what people think about me, because I look like this doll? And that was hard.
The last girl in the first section, because they had several sections, the camera stayed on her face after she chose that last one.
Yeah.
The look on her face, I had to stop the video for a minute.
Yeah.
And then you can go.
Really quick, it's just crazy that they're so young, but they already have these ideas. And again, like, they weren't born thinking this. Like, these are the ideas that the adult presence and, the adults in their lives have consciously, subconsciously, whatever, kind of put on them. And to see that even at that young age that they already feel so deeply and can identify so clearly what's good, what's bad, based on skin color was, again, kind of like Ansley was saying, like, it's heartbreaking.
It was hard. Mm-hmm.
And I think it carries over into their teenage years and their adult years as well, because I know the class that I have, predominantly African American, a lot of the students, they don't claim to be African American. You ask them what they are, they might say they're Puerto Rican, and they're half white, but they never ever claim that they're African American. They're Indian. So thing of not being proud of who they are, it continues. The cycle continues. It never changes. I see that with my students. The darker their skin is, it's considered bad, evil. So it's an ongoing systematic thing. It's a cycle. It continues with them in their teenage years and also in their adult life. It's just something about the dark color. It just carries a stigma of something bad. I see that in a lot of my students.
Yes.
So what can we do about this? How can educators implement social justice education and a humanizing curriculum that acknowledges and centers racial equity?
Well, can I ask a question first? Like, when I was reading this, a thing that came to me while Thaddius was talking was a lot of, like, the adult test was little kids. And a lot of that it comes from the home also, and coming from a family of where my dad was a racist, coming from that, I could see. So it says, when we're talking about curriculum, but how do we reach where we can sit there and tell them and bring in that culture, but then at home, if they're getting the opposite, and they, people based off what their parents tell you. So I feel like no matter what we do, we're going to be fighting with the parents in a way of what they're preaching to their kids and what we're trying to, I just lost my words, but you know what I'm getting at.
I think that kind of ties into the stuff that we read about last week with, like, white fragility and all of this, that whenever you're introducing something new or you're trying to move towards like looking at other people's perspectives, that it's really helpful to kind of prepare students or whoever it is in advance for the emotions that they're going to feel, so that they're able to grapple with these feelings of, I don't know, like anger or confusion as they're learning about things, because that's definitely not something they're going to get at home if their parents are like that. So I think that that would be an extra step in incorporating multicultural things, is for the white students, giving them an outlet, telling them what they can expect to feel as they're learning about things. I think that's kind of an important thing to add in there.
Yeah, and one of the things that struck me in the article about color blindness was the author talking about color being not color blind but color conscious, having that color consciousness, recognizing that race matters and that racism exists, and not ignoring that in the classroom, because I think sometimes we're guilty of that because we don't want to seem like we're racist, so we don't talk about it. And I think that we need to talk about it.
Well, and Whitney, like you mentioned a little bit earlier, like not going too political, but there's so many of the leaders in the country that, and again, as teachers, you know, you've always been told like, oh, don't talk about politics. Right. Especially the high school level kids, you know, want to talk about it. And I've been guilty of being like, well, we're not going to go into that. But again, like you have to talk about it, and you have to, again, you can't be colorblind, but you have to like reinforce that all students, like you value them as human beings. And there, in the Banks article, they talked about teachers being agents of social change. And they empower students. And I think that was key, that you have to empower students to have these conversations, not just do it for them. And again, with the social justice, again, you're the teacher, you have to be the one that kind of gets them going and open the door for those conversations. But the students themselves have to do it too.
Wonderful segue, Becca. Thank you. You mentioned that we have to kind of leave the colorblindness idea behind in order to be effective with this. So I'm actually going to combine our last two questions for time. So talking about colorblindness and its negative implications in school, but then taking that a step further for future considerations as we address colorblindness, anti-Blackness, and racism.
I'll just say that I think we kind of mentioned this as we were working on our case study, like in the comments and things, and trying to figure out how K through 12 works with this. How are you supposed to address this with kindergartners? How do you get to the social justice part of it? I kind of wonder if with those 4 stages from our first article of integrating multicultural content, I kind of wonder if it works on like a K through 12, like you build your way up to social justice, because I feel like kind of the contributions, even though it is heroes and holidays, I feel like it's better than nothing. And for especially really young kids, that's a good way to show them people who are different than them. Then once they get older, they can start reading novels from different perspectives. And then once they get older, then you can kind of change the curriculum until maybe they're seniors in high school. Then they can really start to address social justice and change. So I wonder how those two things work together, these stages, and then also stages of development too.
I think that there is evidence of, allowing teenagers around the middle school age to be able to have social change. Mm-hmm. At the civil rights movement, that was led by teenagers. Mm-hmm. And so that could be a measuring stick right there to where we can have social change in the curriculum age starting at the 8th grade, 7th grade, somewhere along that level.
Yeah.
I think that's a good measuring stick as far as the civil rights movement. Teenagers really led that movement. Maybe start social change at the middle school level. And the reason I say that, because we can use the civil rights movement as a measuring stick. Because we had teenagers during that time who really took hold to the civil rights movement and moved it forward. You had the energy of the young people. So I think using of the civil rights movement of teenagers and how they really took hold of the civil rights movement would be a great measuring stick as far as implementing that into the middle school level. So I think that would be great. That'd be a great measuring stick.